Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 32. Why can you hear the ocean inside of a seashell? So this is a popular myth or popular experience that, especially as children, you might have had, that if you when you have a shell, or especially those bigger shells that you might have found on vacation or bought there, and you pick them up to your ear and you listen to it, you hold it closely and you listen to it, it sounds kind of like you would be hearing the ocean inside of there, the waves and of the ocean waves coming to the shore and so on. And the question is how that is. You might think, the ocean is still in this shell, there's some connection or something. No. Of course, we know that this is not the case, but we want to look into what is the physical effect behind it. Why does it seem like you would hear the ocean inside of such a shell? And it's basically not only in a shell, but in any kind of object like this, like a cup of, if you take your teacup and you hold it to your ear, you will observe a similar effect. So this is, as you might have see has nothing to do with the sea, with the ocean, but it has something to do with something similar, but not really similar. So for this, we need to understand more about waves. So, and in this podcast, I think I several times mentioned waves, and especially in contrast to particles in quantum mechanics, you have this wave-particle duality and so on. But this is basically two ways to describe objects in science. The one is, of course, particle-like objects like marbles or stones or what have you. But on the other hand, there are things like sound, for example. You don't see it, you don't also you can hear it from several places. It's not just one object at one place. You can have something like an echo. If you are in the mountains and you scream really loud, you can hear it echoing back and so forth. So this behaves kind of differently than those marbles and those stones that you know of. So to understand what those are, you need to understand what waves are. So because they are waves, they are not these object-like objects, but they are waves. And as waves are different than those objects, there are different effects, of course, occurring. So you can just imagine a wave just like the waves you see at sea, kind of somewhat similar, but they are more periodically than the waves you would usually see. They have a period, a time from start to beginning, and then they will periodically repeat themselves. And this is the length of this period is their wavelength, and inversely there to this is, of course, their frequency. So basically, the how often such a wave occurs and how often this repeats itself, basically, and how fast it goes. So they have these different properties, and what's the most defining thing that changes from particles to waves, as we also have observed in our observations of quantum mechanics, is that there is this effect of interference occurring. So we had this oftentimes of this interference pattern that occurs in quantum mechanics, and this is one of the main differences that waves have, and this is because a wave can basically expand into all directions, but if it hits a wall or something, then it will get reflected. You know this from many things that are considered to be waves, like light. If it hits a mirror, it will be reflected, or a sound. I was speaking about this echo. This is basically that the sound is reflected at a barrier and returned back to you. And what can happen if this sound is or these waves are reflected, or what will happen is that they will meet each other. The incoming wave will meet the reflected wave, and this can lead to interference, or will lead to interference. And what this means is that whenever a peak of the wave and two peaks of the wave so if the reflecting and the incoming wave, the peaks match and the troughs match, then this will increase the wave amplitude and they will be doubled basically. And whenever they are not in this synchronicity but are anti-synchronicity basically, so a trough is meeting with a peak and a peak with a trough and so on, then they will destructively interfere, which means they will basically go to zero. And so this effect is called interference, and this will have certain effects. And if you have a closed environment, so just like a shell would be, if you hold it to your ear, then it is closed up. There is nothing getting in or out. Then the waves in there will be pulled back and forth, will basically be reflected and so on. And in such a case, there will be only they will interfere each other out over a longer period of time, or not a longer, it will happen pretty quickly, but basically they will interfere each other out. But what only will remain are so-called standing waves, and those are waves whose wavelength fits with the length of the resonator or of the object in which they are. What I mean by that is that the length of the resonator is a multiple of the wavelength itself. So when the wave walks through it, it will, at the ends of this object, it will always be at the same point, and therefore it will not interfere each other out, but it will get to such a standing wave. So it will go back and forth, but there won't be any interference because it will basically be the same wave, because it will be always in synchronicity. And this is what's called a standing wave. And in each frequency of, we are looking at sound right now, so each frequency has its or each tone of sound has its own frequency. So only certain frequencies will have this wavelength, which would be a multiple, or where this length of this object would be a multiple of. So therefore, not all of the sound that gets into this shell will be able to remain in there, but be due this effect of interference will be removed. But certain frequencies will be able to stay in there because they are just the right wavelength. And this is actually the effect that occurs there. So if you put your ears to such a seashell or some other object, then you will basically hear the sound that is able to maintain in there, that is able to build standing waves in this object. Hence, you can consider such a seashell or such an object like a filter of ambient sound. So it's ambient sound, the sound you have in your surrounding, that is where certain frequencies are filtered out by this. As I already told you in the last episodes, I would like to give you short insights into my book, Alien Thoughts, my new novel that is out now. It's available on Amazon. So I would like to give you a short excerpt of it that you can kind of see what the story is all about, what's the content, what is it, and if this is something you might be interested in. All right, let's start. All participants rose respectfully as Boris entered the room. "Be seated," Boris ordered, and sat down as well. "Hank is still busy, but will be here shortly to brief us on the situation." "Ah, here he is already." Hank entered the room. You could tell by the look on his face that he had been working without taking a break for the past few hours. His facial expression did not bode well. Patricia had rarely seen him so tense. He was often very serious, but usually calm and relaxed. But not since she had alerted him to her discovery this morning. "I think it's best if Hank starts reporting on the state of affairs right away," Boris continued, giving Hank the signal to begin. "All right," Hank replied, pausing briefly, during which he connected his neurochip to the computer in the conference room. This allowed him to project from his chip to the screen. "This morning, Patricia and I came across him when we were checking the logs of the refugees. Theodore Freeman. His new neurochip has the expected properties, but a neurochip he had implanted during his time in the rebel areas showed a period of time where the chip was nearly inactive and the fugitive was not subject to mind control. Patricia was confused. Normally she would not interrupt a meeting like this, but she finally wanted to know what it all meant. She blurted out, "Wait a minute, the people in the rebel areas don't have neurochips implanted in them, don't they? That's why we don't have them under mind control, right?" There was a silence for a moment. Hank didn't know how to continue and he looked inquiring at Boris. Boris nodded. "You can go ahead and fill her in. That's why she's here." If this excerpt caught your interest, I encourage you to get my book Alien Thoughts and to just read on what happened before, what will happen after this, and then I really would enjoy it if you could give me a review of what you've thought about the book. If you have already ordered it and read it, then I really would enjoy your feedback as well. So for this you can either write a review on Amazon, which would be great because this always helps people to other people who might be interested in this book to understand if this book is something for them and get feedback, but also you can write to me at my contact formula at my website sci-faith.de/en/contact. There you can contact me and write me what you think about the book and the feedback you have for me. Thank you. I really appreciate your support. And now let's continue with the podcast. If you know about music, then you maybe also know that there are also overtones. So for one wave, you can, for example, have an half of this wave, which is basically just this wave halved, which would be the first overtone, and this would you would call one half, and then the next one third, and so on. And this is actually also a series in mathematics, which is called the harmonic series, which is basically you take 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/3, and so on, and you sum them all up. This is a series which will diverge, so it will tend to go to infinity. But the interesting thing is if you put this graph on a graph and you graph all those overtones basically, then you will see that this is really similar to the shape of a shell, so of a seashell, of a certain seashell. This is really almost the same. So there is a picture that went through social media where this was shown, where there's an X-ray photo of a seashell was shown, and also this graphic representation of this harmonic series, which also has this connection to music. And there you can see how similar this is to each other, which also explains why this effect of hearing the sea or hearing this noise of this ambient noise, which is filtered, as we have explained, or as I have just explained, why this is in seashells seems to be more present than like in a teacup, and therefore this might be related to that. And on this picture, this was subtitled, or there was this quote from supposedly Pythagoras, where he said, "Physical matter is music solidified." So this should be a representation of the statement that physical matter is music solidified, so materialized, or music basically will be then seen in physics. And I think this was pretty similar to what I oftentimes have, the statement that I oftentimes have in essence on this podcast, where I basically say that the creation always reflects on the creator, where it basically says this, that the creator is itself reflected in nature, in creation, as it also says in Romans 1:20, that we can basically find God in nature. So we find his traces in nature, and therefore can understand that he has indeed created the world. This was freely paraphrased, but now what I've immediately thought about this, because what is music, or if we look in the biblical sense, what is music always related to? It's always related to worship, or also to the word of God. And the word says that God created this world through his word. And therefore, by speaking into this world was created. So seeing that this music seems to be integrated, or this word seems to be integrated in such things like the seashell, like in this post there, I think this is just an illustration, or just an image on the fact that God indeed created the world through his word. And I already mentioned this relation between, of course, music and worship, and this is always I think this also shows that all creations is longing to worship its creator, to worship its Lord and creator, as Jesus also said in the Gospels when the Pharisees were rebuking the Jews for worshiping Jesus, and where he said, if they don't worship me, the stones will cry out. So he basically implies here that all of creation longs for the worship of God, or longs to worship God, and therefore this is, I think, also can also be seen here, that in creation itself this is implemented, is put in, and this we can see also with this image. This I found really fascinating, and found a really fascinating fact about seashells and their connection with music and worship. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic, or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast. And then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that. And now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.